This is going to sound a little bit like a public service announcement, but here goes. Show of hands, do you or anyone you love suffer from an inability to get contemporary art? Anybody here? Yes, me too, I know. I've worked in the art world for about 10 years now, and I currently work at a company called Artsy, where it's an online platform where I try to make art accessible to anyone who wants to learn more about it and maybe start collecting it. And this is something that I encounter on a daily basis. And I'm well aware of the fact that a lot of people think that contemporary art is a sham. This is actually one of my favorite examples of the sentiment in action. This is a scene from the sitcom It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And Danny DeVito is playing this sort of eccentric, artsy collector. So he goes around pointing at the art saying, this is bullshit, bullshit, derivative. He comes over and finds a piece he loves. I love it. I want it. And the gallerist sort of leans over to him and in this hushed, tasteful voice says, that's the air conditioner. Now, undeterred, he says, I want it. It's everything. So I think the takeaway here is pretty clear, right? Either contemporary art is a total sham, or you have to be an insider to get it. And if you're not an insider, you might be made to feel inferior for not getting it. Now, I think that this is really an unfortunate state of affairs. So that's why I wanted to talk to you today about this. Because I joke that this is a PSA, but I really do believe that art, especially art of our day, is a public good. And you deserve more from your art. So I'm going to tell you today about a few of the historic reasons for why art today is so inaccessible. But I'm also going to give you a few tips that I think will help you better understand about 99% of the art that you see. Now, before I dive into this, I just want to start with a few ground rules. I'm going to be talking about modern and contemporary art. The difference between the two of those is really a topic for a whole other talk. But when I say modern art, I basically mean art since 1900. When I say contemporary, I'm kind of talking about art since the 1960s. And the other one is that I am going to be talking about Western art here. It does have its own tradition, which is different from what we might call non-Western art, this umbrella category of anything that's not the US or Europe. But okay, so let's get started. Why don't you get contemporary art? I think there are 3 reasons for this. The first is it's the art world. Now, the art world relishes its exclusivity. Instead of trying to invite you in and helping you engage with the art, it sets you up to fail from the beginning. Music and TV and podcasts, as we just learned, we can enjoy them on demand. They come to us, and many people have really deep and meaningful experiences with them. So why should contemporary art be any different? Well, I do think that part of this is a little bit the on-demand model, in the sense that with art, you have to go out into the world to experience it. You have to go to a museum or a gallery, and once you're there, you're going to encounter gallerists and curators and the art world, in a sense. With art, the institutions of it are front and center, and they're often monumental, like cities upon a hill. So you have to get past all of this before you can actually get to the art. You have to literally climb the hill, like with the Met here in New York, to get to the art. So let's talk about the art a little bit. The British artist Tracey Emin has said, modern art is merely the means by which we terrorize ourselves. Art today can be conceptual or cerebral. It can be boring and difficult. We're going to talk about why this is. But before we do, I want to get to the 3rd reason that you don't get contemporary art. And this also happens to be the one thing that's within your control to change. It's you. It is, in part, your fault. But the flip side of that is that art needs you to be got, right? It needs you, the viewer, to interpret it and to add meaning to it. You might be asking now, okay, so how am I supposed to do that? And to answer this question, we really need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to a time before art meant really what it does today. Okay, I'm going to ask you to think right now about artists. Think about some of the traits that you might associate with them, right? I think a lot of us will think that they might be creative or original. They might even be genius. They're probably also difficult and passionate about what they do. They act as if the normal rules of society didn't apply to them. Well, we only have to go back about 250 years to encounter an entirely different conception of what it means to be an artist. We can actually see this change happening right before our eyes when we compare two encyclopedias from the 18th century. So right here, we're looking at Ephraim Chambers' Table of Knowledge from 1728. And over here, where he's mapped out all of sort of human achievement, under what we would normally consider the arts, we see two totally different groupings. We see one for architecture, sculpture, and manufacturing. And those are grouped under the mechanical arts. Now, in a separate category, we have painting and perspective under optics. So in other words, this idea of like a unified artist, a unified set of fine arts doesn't yet exist. Now, if we fast forward a mere 23 years to 1751, we're looking at Diderot's encyclopedia here. And now, for the first time, we have a real grouping of art as we know it today. So music, painting, sculpture, architecture, engraving. These are all grouped together. And what's more, Diderot grouped them under the realm of the imagination, right? So the imagination is this like higher realm of human achievement than even memory and reason, which were Diderot's other two categories. Now, what happens when we elevate the arts to this higher transcendent realm of the imagination? It basically becomes a quasi-religion, and artists become these sort of secular priests. And, you know, like all religions, art starts to develop its own institutions, its own way of thinking, its own behaviors, and its own intermediaries, right? These people who can speak directly to the gods and translate for the rest of us laymen. So it's these intermediaries that I'm kind of calling the art world. And again, just like in religion, they have their own liturgical language. You might recognize this, or you might have encountered it elsewhere. Here's an example. Humanity has aspired to elevation and desire to be free from alienation and subjugation to gravity. The physical and existential dialectic, which is in a permanent state of oscillation between height and willful falling, drives us to explore the limits of balance. So if you need an interpretation here, this is kind of just saying something about standing up. Now, quite recently, two researchers, Alix Rule and David Levine, discovered that this type of language has enough unique linguistic traits to be considered its own dialect. It has its own syntax, it has its own vocabulary, so it uses words like aporia and transversal that none of us use in everyday language. Now, you might ask, like, why does the art world speak like this? And, in good faith, there are some historic reasons that have to do with theories on the way that art produces meaning. But really, this type of language is a social marker. It designates an inside and an outside group, which means that language like this, whether it's in a press release or an article, it's generally not written for you. Now, I know this is frustrating, okay? I find it frustrating too. I don't get this type of language often. And the thing that I find most frustrating about it is actually the fact that it's often used to cloud what might otherwise be a very simple work of art. And what's unfortunate about this is that it makes it easy to dismiss art that might be simple or that we don't like as bullshit. So, for example, if I see the cult horror movie Leprechaun 2 in the Hood, it's if you haven't seen it, it's about some hip-hop performers who accidentally unleash a leprechaun from his magic prison. And, if I saw this, I would probably feel empowered to say that I don't like it, right? But if someone presented it to me as being about the existential plight of urban youth and the barriers, both real and imagined, physical and uncanny, that problematize their post-capitalist pursuit of fame and wealth, I'm going to call bullshit. Again, this is really unfortunate because what it does is it allows us to dismiss art that we don't like as a sham. And it would be preferable if you felt empowered to just say that you don't like this art. Because if you don't like it, it follows that there's art that you like. And that means you have an opinion, which is one of the first steps of getting art.